Welcome back. It is
Hello.
fantastic to be here. We are in season 2 because we already did 40 episodes in season 1. So if you are, that's really exciting.
It is.
Thank you. We had 40 episodes in season 1 and we've started our new season, and we are really, really looking forward to some really inspiring conversations that we're going to be having this season here at Getting to Unstuck. So if this is your first time joining us, welcome. My name is Crystal, and Colin is co-hosting with me today, and we have a special guest. We have our friend Amanda Ring, who's here. Today we're going to be talking...
Returning.
Yes.
Returning.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Welcome back.
Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, awesome. We're excited. Today we're going to be talking about the most authentic way to build connection. And I want to, before we get into that, I want to just give people a little bit of context about why we love having you as a guest, Amanda. Amanda is a transformational thought leader, and I think we can attest to that. We've had a lot of really great conversations with her, and Colin has seen her in action in many different capacities. She's a consciousness and an empowerment coach and a spiritual guide. So that is a very hefty portfolio to be carrying, Amanda. So before we get into talking a little bit more about connection, I would love for you to help us understand a little bit about your journey to how we're going to be talking about connection, but why connection is so important in light of what you've experienced in your journey.
Well, yeah, and just to go back to your comment about, the hefty description or, the labels that we give ourselves. Like, I always think about this when, trying to describe the work that I do or the hats that I wear. And, as we journey through our lives, through our evolutions, personally and professionally, our hats change, what we associate with in terms of our work or the importance of our purpose changes and evolves. So I always struggle with how to put a name on things too sometimes,
Yeah.
But yeah, I, personally and professionally, my journey is always woven together. And I say that's probably the case for a lot of people, because when we're journeying through healing or change or transformation in our personal lives, it weaves into every aspect of our life.
Sure.
Yeah. And I think right away, authenticity comes up for me when you ask that question about my journey and how I ended up. Maybe if your question was more about how I've ended up here and doing the work that I'm doing, because even as a young person, I always felt connected to other people. Strangers would come up to me. I could be standing, with my mom at a local fair, or with my grandfather, or the schoolyard, or whatever. And kids and people would just start talking to me and sharing stories, opening up. And there was an immediate, natural connection. And throughout my life, I always felt like I had a natural capacity to hold space, to people to feel safe around me, people to feel like they could open up. And then as I got older, as we all do, culture shapes us, the education system shapes us, and we're told, okay, this is the path that, through education and through professional development and career path, this is the way we are meant to go.
Mm-hmm.
And I am a natural optimist, so I always enjoyed every step of what I was doing and exploring. But there were points at which I recognized that even though I was connected to what I was doing and how I was experiencing life and the choices I was making, there was some element of that over time that didn't feel authentic to me, and in the sense of that I was changing, or maybe there were things about the way I was or the way I was living or how I identified myself that were clouded in story and things I had adopted, and not like ideas and perceptions about where I was supposed to be, what I was supposed to be doing, versus what was my soul and heart really calling me towards. And at a certain point in my career as an occupational therapist, and through a breakdown of a marriage and moving through a big change, I realized, my soul has been calling to the spiritual path and to more of a path of awakening consciousness and seeing the world in a very different way for a long, long time. But I wasn't fully honoring that because I wasn't fully connected to my authentic self. So that led me to continuing to explore all of the things that I offer in my work now. And then through that process, as I kept connecting with who I was on a more authentic, deep level, I started embracing the fact that this is what I wanted to do with my life. And this was my purpose. And so I could see how connection and authenticity just wove together there for me to bring me to this point currently with my business and how I connect with clients, how I connect with my family. Yeah. I don't know if that answered your question. It might have been a little bit.
No, actually, it answered my question, and it gave me a lot more questions. But I'm going to let Colin weigh in first, because I just realized he hasn't even had a chance for me. I haven't given him space.
Oh, no. My gosh, I'm happy to just sit back and listen too, for once, right? Because usually I'm interjecting all of the time. Amanda, what do you think? So I have kind of like a pragmatic question about, because I was speaking to a friend this morning in the UK, and we were talking about kind of the same things, and connection and humanity and people, and she said, we forgot about community and connection and humanity at kind of a very specific time in history, when we went from local towns, community, into the urban. And it's almost as if that urbanization made us forget about our collective humanity and our connection. And, she spoke about her when she was young, and her dad was a farmer, and how when it was harvest season, and ironically, we're here at this point in time, when it was harvest season, all of the farmers would, and Crystal, I'm sure that you can connect with this, but all of the farmers would come together and help each other, right?
Yeah.
Whereas today, living in a much more sort of urban existence, we've forgotten that. What do you is that a big contributor to this disconnect from, oh, sorry, that's bad. But this separation from connection that we seem to have had in the past and don't have much less of today? Where do you think the origin is? Where's the origin story of this? And it's a question for you both, because you as well, Crystal.
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. I can see many different layers to that, because certainly from moving away from the village, where that village culture where people would be very interdependent. And even if we go further back to our ancestral connections, regardless of what part of the world our ancestral connections come from, people lived closely with the earth. They lived more closely with the seasons. And so there was a communal understanding that at certain times of the year, there were going to be a need to depend on one another, very potentially. Right. And that their survival, and not just their survival, but the thriving of the village, depended on that capacity to be aware of one another and stay connected to one another. So I can see that probably, certainly staying within. There's threads of that still in our rural communities, but certainly not in the way that it has been. I mean, for myself, growing up here in Mi'kma'ki in Nova Scotia, and a very small fishing town myself, I experienced how the fishing industry changed, and how that changed even the community of how, the family structures,
Mm-hmm.
how people were relating to one another, and how people changed in terms of showing up as volunteers and things like that. So I think there's definitely an element of industrialization and centralization to urban areas that has influenced that. However, my first degree is in anthropology and archaeology, and I took a lot of sociocultural anthropology courses. And one of my assignments, we had to do an ethnography on a microculture, and I decided to study coffee shop culture because as a student, I spent a lot of time.
Yeah.
Because I'm someone who likes a variety of environment, so I work well when I move around a little bit, not every day, but so I used to study in coffee shops as well as the library and so on. And that was a really fascinating exploration because I was observing, what, if any, kind of community and connection, and what were the interactions with people, what were the themes that were happening. And I went to different ones, like 24-hour ones, ones that were right in the city center, ones that are down by the waterfront. And and I think that when I think about urban cultures, and I haven't lived in a city for a long time, I've lived in big European city in Dublin, I've lived in Halifax, I've lived in Hamilton in Ontario, I've lived in a few cities for periods of time. I think the culture shapeshifts and connection shapeshifts, and they become more micro communities.
I agree.
In the urban setting, which has a benefit to itself. However, it does create a bit of this fracturing, and because of the geographical mass of people and space, it's harder to get that cohesiveness, probably in connection. But I don't know if I could answer that from a very well-versed urban perspective, and maybe Crystal, or maybe even you, Colin, could more so. But I do feel that from a psychological and psycho-emotional place, that clients that I work with and in events and circles and retreats, I do see a difference in terms of capacity to soften into opening into connection with others, with people who live in more of an urbanized area than people who are coming from maybe a more rural province or region. I do definitely see that. What would you like to share about that, Crystal?
Yeah, I would say the same thing. So I would say that there is definitely a connection in, Colin, when you were referring to, for example, like that, how people come around each other, like because there's an affinity of lifestyle when you live in the country, and generally that's by choice that people live in the country, because it's a much more intentional choice, I think.
It's a lifestyle choice.
Yeah, it's a lifestyle choice, right? So there's definitely an affinity, and I did experience that growing up. However, from a personal note, and this is really interesting to think about, my parents, my brother died in an accident when he was 20. I was 24, and so we had lived in the country before, and I was no longer at home. But my parents, after his death, they moved into the small town that we were a few miles outside of before. And the difference that I saw in their ability to connect with people when they were running into those people every day, when it was so in that small community, it was also much more attainable for them to get involved locally in all kinds of different things. Everything from, for them, there's a little church that they're a part of, but like everything from like local interest groups, all the things that are around that. I see such strong community in that small town, and the two of you are from an area that has those same kind of strong connections. So there are those social connections. However, or maybe, and I would say, someone who from when I was little always wanted to live in the city, and I live in the city, I do see that connections happen more intentionally in urban areas. I mean, that's been my experience anyways, because it's less about affinity and more about something. Maybe it is about
Uh,
affinity, but it's less about happenstance and more about intentional reasons to
right.
enter and build your community and build connection.
It's purposeful. It's like
It's purposeful, yeah.
you
Mhm.
purposefully go and seek out that connection where it can
Yeah,
happen more
Yes.
casually somewhere where Amanda and I are living now, because it
yeah,
just
yeah.
it kind of happens.
Yeah, and I think also, in this conversation and thinking about the people that we all work with. So we are business owners, we're entrepreneurs. I've only ever worked for organizations that I've started or under contract for something. I've never been a long-term employee anywhere. But I have, but we work with people that are seeking connection. Often and I think when people are starting to seek connection with other people, the first place that they seek, because it seems to be intuitive, is to seek outside themselves. And it rather can feel counterintuitive to seek to be connected to who you are as a person, because we maybe we're working in environments that have external factors that we're being measured by. We're seeking to, maybe we're leading someone on a team and we're seeking to give them all the indications that they can trust us. And, we can be trying really hard, but there is something that is very special to the work that you do, Amanda, that I think is counterintuitive to looking outside first, even though it results in that ability to connect with people in a more authentic way. And I'm wondering if you can help us understand what you've seen in your work around how people manage to build outward connections in a healthier way after they've taken that inward journey.
Oh, absolutely. It's profound to witness. Honestly.
Yeah.
And it's been a personal experience of my own in that sort of rediscovery of myself. It's, when talking with people and they start to open up, and I mean, most people come into this space because, not most, I would say, 60% of people are coming into the space with me because they're yearning for this connection, right? There's a sense of like, I'm not feeling the zest of life, or I'm feeling lost, or it's usually they're coming in with the sort of the opposite of how they want to feel, but they haven't been able to name how they want to feel, right? It's like, I feel lost, or I'm dissatisfied. I'm struggling with a lot of challenges because I'm got this pain or this trauma that I haven't dealt with, or I'm going through this big life change and I'm questioning everything in my life, that sort of thing. And, that's a really hard but beautiful place to start, because typically we have also been cultured by the patriarchal paradigm to seek self-worth, to like our value, our purpose, our satisfaction, our fulfillment has this direct correlation to what the outside world has to say about how we are in the world. Right. So we tend to, like you said, in terms about measurement, we're measuring our happiness or our sense of feeling fulfilled in our relationships and our lives to all these standards that have been set. And they're deeply in our psyche. From the time we're a child, we're observing our family dynamics. Whatever education system we enter has all these standards that have a value connected to them that we must meet. So when people come in, we start exploring like how are they connecting in their relationships? How do they value what, and this is kind of my OT brain as well, like what's meaningful to them?
Sure.
And how are they engaging with that? Are they actually living authentically in alignment with those things, or is that just like a something on the side that they kind of allow themselves to entertain every now and then because they have to keep on keeping on with this or that? So, and they can't fully understand this external connection and relationship to their value until they start going in and start asking those deeper questions around who they are. And, you know, if this didn't matter and that didn't matter, what would they be doing with their life, or how would they want to feel? And this inner connection goes beyond our mental and psychological understanding of life. It's more connected to the heart and our soul or spiritual understanding. And maybe some people wouldn't use that language, but it's more about the meaning of life. Like, it goes to that deeper place.
Yeah.
So that is the bridge that we cross over when I'm working with people, you know. And some people are coming because they're having an awakening experience. They've all of a sudden, there's been some big catalyst in their life, which might not appear to be big to somebody else, but it's big to them, that they're like taking stock of where they're at in their lives, how they're in. Maybe they love their career, but how they're engaged in their career, or how they're, you know, the balance within that is happening is they've completely lost themselves in it. You know, there could be a myriad of things, but they have a catalyzing experience that they go, whoa, like, is this really me in my life? And you know, and it's like somebody puts cold water in their face, and then they're just like, okay, the compass is going like this. Where the hell am I? Where do I go from here? Something needs to change. Sometimes they don't even know what needs to change, but they're just like, something is not feeling familiar anymore. Something's not feeling connected anymore. And a lot of times it's a false connection that they've had, you know, and there's some kind of experience that's awakening their heart. You know, it's awakening them from a deep, deep place within themselves, whether people subscribe to the idea of a soul or not. It's like, it's this deep knowing place. And that's where I like to take people, is more into that. How do we start to re-embody ourselves and get out of our heads and into our hearts and into our bodies that have this wisdom that we've been really cultured to not pay that much attention to until it's screaming at us. And that's where illness comes in. And that's where, you know, so this prevalence of anxiety, this low grade anxiety and fight or flight mode that so many people are in society. And I've been in it too.
I'll never.
It's like it's dis-ease, right?
It's
dis-ease. It's
that
away
we've come to accept as normal.
Yeah, it's the baseline now, right? Like,
it's the baseline. Like, no,
that's so wrong.
Not on my watch, and not in the world that I want to live in and be part of creating, because that is not alignment. That is a struggle to constantly try to get into alignment, and that's why people are so exhausted.
Burnt out,
and they don't have the time for the things that really light them up inside, you know, that help them feel connected to life, you know, and that's connected to our authenticity. So we have lots of masks, which I know you guys have talked about on other episodes, because I've listened, and I, you know, we sing from the same musical sheets that way. You know, there's all these masks, there's all these hats, and there's attachment to those and false safety within them. But our culture has created this comparative narrative that rhymes, but a comparative narrative.
I like that. I have to write that down.
I know. I was like, I'm going to write that down. That's good.
Comparative narrative. Okay.
Stuff that I never remember, and people will say, write that down.
I got it. I'll send it to you all.
But it's
we'll post it.
A comparative narrative, which, and I'll harp on the patriarchy a bit. And for those that are listening and aren't familiar with the concept of what the patriarchal paradigm or the patriarchy is, so many people have a misunderstanding that that's like this man-hating thing, because they think the patriarchy is associated with men, but it's not. It's a systematic. It's a system of oppression. It's a system of control. It's a way to approach collective groups of people, societies, in a way to try to manage them. But the way they try to manage through a patriarchal system is through comparison and contrast and competition and shaming and blaming and guilt and fear tactics to get people to be easier to maneuver into the spaces that the system wants them to be.
It's like the Roman Empire, right? It's just so
Yeah.
old.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and it is something that gotten adopted. So much of our Western culture, it's adopted within our religious organizations. Like it's all over the place. And yes, at the helm of a lot of those decision-making ships, there's been a lot of male representatives in those seats, but the patriarchal paradigm has influenced everybody, regardless of male or female or gender, across the board, or ethnicity. You know, it's goes beyond all of those identifiers. And so that comparative narrative is so destructive, because people shape shift and mold themselves to fit some type of identity or quality of a human, as some kind of descriptor, because they feel if they don't, they're not enough. They're not valuable enough, or not valued enough, or they're going to be left behind. They're not going to fit in. All of these things. And all of that is at the deep, deep, deep core level, hits us in our deepest wounding. And every single person, I think I might have said this on the last recording, but every single person that I've worked with, no matter what socioeconomic status they come from or what country I've worked with them within, the deepest wounding that people are working with is this limiting belief and perception that they aren't lovable, that they don't belong, or they're not right enough for the world in some way.
I agree.
It boils down to love.
It does. Loving, being able to, and again, it is the world within first, right? Not exclusively.
No, we need people. We are designed for connection with other humans. And the world, and nature.
But if you can start by looking at that kind of core wound of unworthiness that we all seem to have been taught somehow, and maybe that's the lesson that we have here on Earth, that the core wound of unworthiness that we seem to have all arrived with or gotten conditioned to, that's where you start.
Well, if you think about it, do you remember I was raised in public school in Canada. And I remember always at the front of the class, there were like people's names. There was like whether checks or X's, if you'd done your assignments or if you got your stars or whatever. And so from basically the age that you were starting to learn to take in messaging and make sense of the world, you are already tossed into an environment that fostered feeling unworthy, unless you were number one, unless you attained this external goal that was not necessarily true to you. You know, you may be a kid that you processed differently, but other kids were able to get 100% in spelling, but you were judged publicly because you processed differently. Or
even the grading system.
The grading system. When I was a kid, I remember gym class was an exercise in public humiliation for about a third of the class, probably. We would do these things. In Canada, we did this thing called the Canada Fitness Test or something like that. I don't know if you remember that.
I remember it. Same, Crystal. Yeah.
And and publicly, you would have to do the fitness test in front of the rest of your class, and you would be assigned like bronze, silver, gold, or you failed.
You're standing, which equals what? Your worthiness, your value, like, I mean, in every way, shape, and form, Crystal.
Every way, shape, and form. And so I think that this is really an important thing, because the comparative narrative it's so deeply embedded in us, but we have identified it with it so closely, and with those feelings of worth, that we think that we are the source of it, but we're not the source of it. It's the systems, exactly what you were saying. and being able to give ourselves permission to accept the fact that I was born into a system. I have been shaped by the system. I don't need to continue to be,
Exactly.
I can disentangle myself from the system, but I love who I was before, and I have grace for that person, and I love who I am now as a result. Like, what a different narrative to approach everything in life, wherever
Yep.
you're showing up from, to recognize those things.
And truly, just even and hearing you say that, there are so many people that never truly got to discover who they authentically are or were
Right.
as a child, because they were always bumping up against either the archetype they were given,
Yeah.
or bumping up against the things to get the attention in the way that they were thought they were supposed to get the attention, like whatever parenting style was in vogue. And so, yes, definitely our education system, but also our family systems, which our parents, all of our parents, and as I say to all of my clients and on retreats and things, like we're never exploring our family of origin from a place of that patriarchal lens of shame and blame and guilt, but it's to understand why do we feel the way we do about ourselves and how we judge ourselves or criticize others, so that we have an understanding. And I say that of our operating system. So we can't change our operating system if we don't know kind of why it's doing what it's doing. Sometimes we can just decide, like, you know what, this feels like shit and I don't want to do this anymore, so I will make that change. But when we're 5 or 8 or 3, we're just doing what children do, which is try to survive and be seen and loved and have fun and learn. And, so we don't have that awareness. But then as we become adults, and when we start to get curious about, gee, why do I think like that? Or why did I say that to that person? Or why do I always treat my partner like that? Or why do I get so nervous when the boss walks in? Or, when we start asking ourselves those questions, it will invariably have a thread back to our childhood experiences with our family of origin, with our school, with everything, because that our families have also been indoctrinated with the paradigm and the system. So they're not, there's, it's not about blaming them, but also understanding and giving space to feelings and emotions and traumas and micro traumas that many people have had that don't realize how largely they've impacted their self-perception and their perception of relationship, their perception of how they're supposed to show up, as a good person or a good employee or a good wife or a good husband or a good this or a good that, like all this, the patriarchal paradigm also for everybody in every part of these micro systems is it's a binary system. It's either good or it's bad. You're either in or you're out. And you're only in if you agree to show up in this way, in this way, in this way, in this way, in this way. Then you're allowed in.
And you have to keep on renewing that ability to be able to stay in, because there is no grace for growth or change or anything.
No. And we can change the rules whenever we want.
That's right.
Whether you agree to that or not. And then so there's layers of layers, circling back to your original question, like, so for so many people, when they're coming to me with either confusion or dissatisfaction or like really like depression and feeling so disconnected, the first, port of call for me is to start helping them steer their ship back into their own hearts and into recognizing that they're important, recognizing that how they feel is important, what they like and don't like is important, and starting to then shed some of, like, because a lot of people don't even know genuinely, okay, I don't even know if I want to do this or not. How do I know? How do I know? So some of that's mental work, but some of that is more body-based work, and it's more energetic work, and it's more heart work, and it's so it's so important to go in here so that we start to find those true compass points, the true north, like you said, about, I can be who I was. But maybe we didn't even get to have a proper glimpse of who that was. We didn't get to live it enough to know it. So finding that true north can feel like a very much of a pioneering path.
Right. Yeah.
So I heard, I mean, it feels like a break the glass in case of emergency moment, right, in time for a lot of people. But I also heard the answer to our question about this whole podcast, the most authentic way to true connection is you turn back into here.
Yeah.
Back
Well,
to you.
Well, let's think about that for a second. When you meet someone, I know we can have a natural affinity to people. However, what that natural affinity, what is that about? Like when you meet someone new, you're at a gathering or, you know, a social event, or it could be a work thing. And you meet someone and there's different qualities in those connections and those interactions, right? Sometimes it's like, even though you're not talking about the weather, it feels like you're talking about the weather.
Yeah.
If I were to use an analogy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then other times it's like there's a sensing of, whoa, like I want to get closer to this person. We could talk about the weather, or we could talk about the color of the walls, but I'm like, I want to get closer to you. I just want to sit next to you.
Yeah. Exactly.
And so much of it's not even conscious, because we have these sixth sense about us that are reading the energy of the space and the people automatically, which we're not necessarily taught about either, which is a big piece of the work that I do with people. And so that is, I feel there's a large part of that is how much that person that we're connecting with is connected to themselves, because there is a sense of embodiment and awareness of authenticity. Like they're maybe more comfortable in their own skin. They're more comfortable.
Yeah. And I think there's an attraction factor there that people maybe they can't necessarily put their finger on, but it's just, there's an attraction in terms of like, you find yourself wanting to be around that person, or you maybe recognize that you feel better when you're around them, or you want to hear their insights around things too.
Well, I think we need to organize a few more podcasts, Amanda.
Yeah, there's a lot there. Wow. We could just unpack the Canada Fitness Fest from like,
Jeez. Oh, and so much more. Oh, goodness.
Oh.
Yes.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Well, Amanda, thank you. This has been, as always, it's always a pleasure to have you as a guest and to have you in our world. So thank you for joining us today.
I appreciate the invitation, and it's an absolute delight to talk with you and Colin, and Carol. We miss you, Carol.
Yeah, we miss you, Carol.
I think we need to start a series. This feels like a story with chapters, and we need to have Amanda keep coming back to get unstuck to tell those chapters, or to not tell them, but to share those conversations. Because
turn the page on the next chapter.
So
I love
stay tuned.
I love all of these questions, and I'd love just to end with this one thought, because I think the listeners would appreciate this, and it's not my original thought. I think it was Deepak Chopra maybe that said it, or might have been Joe Dispenza, maybe. Either way,
icons. Either way,
that our world shapes around our questions. Our world gets created by the questions we ask.
Yes.
Something like that. Yeah. And so I just absolutely adore the questions that you guys come up with, because I think this is the creative life process in action when we start. Because any of us have all the answers. We have our direct experiences, and we have the capacity to ask those questions and be like, okay, how does this make sense? And how does our perceptions shape around it? So I just feel like that's part of this consciousness shift we can have. And so these questions you are asking for your listeners are just, they could change and I'm sure they do change lives, because people, once we start to question our own way of thinking, we have the power to make so much change in our lives.
Yeah.
So thank you for getting to Unstuck into the fray of, this evolution in humanity right now.
Yeah.
It's so needed. So thank you.
So needed. Thank you. Thank you, Amanda.
And perfect timing, like harvest moon, equinox, seasons are changing. So let's looking forward to the autumn chapters with you.
Yes.
And seeing where the questions go. So
yeah, perfect.
I am going to press the outro, which I think is right. It's working.
Okay, perfect.
We're having some I'm having tech challenges all along. Anyway, thanks.
It is what it is. Well, thank you. And again, if you are still here, thanks for joining us. Thank you for being part of this conversation. Your presence in this conversation is felt, and we know that you were listening and you were a part of it for a reason. So if you've enjoyed the show, like and please subscribe, and we will see you in our next episode. Thanks for joining.
Take care. Bye-bye.